Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Alicia Trotline podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Trotline, and I am so glad to have you here today. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm a mom of 4 amazing kids, 3 of whom are autistic. I'm also on the autism spectrum myself, and I've spent the last several years advocating for neurodiverse families through my blog, The Momkind, and other platforms like this podcast. Today, we're diving into a topic that's incredibly personal to me: navigating autism as an adult. This is a journey that many later diagnosed individuals experience, including myself. I'll be sharing my story about how I found out I was autistic and why this is becoming a very common experience for adults who are diagnosed later in life, especially after their children are diagnosed with autism. But beyond my story, I'll also share some research, insights, and practical tips that I hope will help you or someone you love navigate this journey with more clarity and confidence. Let me take you back for a moment. When my children were first diagnosed with autism, I had no idea that I might be on the spectrum too. At the time, I was doing everything I could to understand their needs, support their learning, and be the best advocate for them I could be. But it wasn't until I started diving deeper into the world of autism, especially as it related to my kids, that I began to think, wait, a lot of this sounds like me. I started noticing the parallels between my own struggles and the traits associated with autism. Things like sensory sensitivities, difficulties with social situations, needing structure, and finding it hard to express certain emotions according to the situation. At first, I dismissed these thoughts thinking, I can't possibly be autistic. That's something you're diagnosed with as a child, and I'm now an adult. But as I spent more time learning about autism, everything started to make sense. And that's when I realized I was likely autistic myself. My children's diagnosis led me to my own, and it was a huge moment of clarity. It's actually a fairly common experience for adults to get diagnosed after their children. In fact, research is starting to show that many parents, especially mothers, discover their own autism after their children's diagnosis. But why does this happen? Well, for many of us, autism wasn't as well understood when we were growing up. Traits in girls and women in particular were often overlooked or misdiagnosed. So when we become parents and start learning about autism through our children, it's like a light bulb goes off. Suddenly, all those moments in our lives that felt confusing or isolating start to make sense. Let me share with you a moment in my life that really stood out to me that, hey, maybe this might be it for me. I remember one day my son was having a meltdown because his socks felt wrong. He kept saying, they're too bumpy, they're too scratchy. And in that moment, I realized I've always hated certain textures too. I spend so much time picking the tags out of my clothes or avoiding foods or materials because of how they felt. And at that time, I thought I was just being picky because that's what we were told. You're just being picky. When the reality was, it was a sensory sensitivity, something that many autistic individuals experience. Have you ever had a moment like that where you realize something about yourself while learning about your child? I'd love to hear your stories. Feel free to share them with me on social media or in the comments of this podcast. Being diagnosed as an adult is definitely different from being diagnosed as a child. For me, it wasn't about trying to understand myself through childhood experiences, but rather understanding why I struggled with certain situations and experiences my whole life. It's not like I didn't know something was off or different about me, but the diagnosis gave me the vocabulary and the framework to explain it. After my diagnosis, it was both relieving and overwhelming. There's a sense of, finally, I understand why, but also a lot of questions about how this would change my life. How would it impact my relationships, my parenting, my work? And the biggest question, what now? But the more I learned, the more I realized that this diagnosis wasn't a limitation. It was an opportunity. It gave me the chance to embrace who I am, to understand myself on a deeper level, and to move forward with more confidence. For me, self-awareness became the key to living my best life. One thing I've learned is that being diagnosed later in life often comes with a unique set of challenges. For example, many of us have spent years masking or hiding our autistic traits to fit into societal norms. This can lead to burnout, anxiety, depression, and even a sense of losing our identity. But the diagnosis can also be the very first step towards unmasking and rediscovering who we truly are. Let me pause here and ask you, have you ever felt like you were masking or hiding parts of yourself to fit in? How did that feel? For me, unmasking has been a journey of self-acceptance, and I'd love to hear how it's been for you. If you're newly diagnosed or in the process of seeking a diagnosis, I want to share some tips that might help you navigate this journey. First and foremost, know that you're not alone. There's a whole community of people who understand what you're going through, and we're here to help and support you. Here are a few things that help me. 1, educate yourself. Learn as much as you can about autism. Books, podcasts, and online communities can be great resources. Understanding your diagnosis can help you make sense of your experience and feel more empowered. 2, finding a supportive community. Connecting with other autistic adults can be incredibly validating. Whether it's through social media groups, local meetups, or online forums, finding people who get it can make a huge difference. Third up, you want to advocate for yourself. If you are seeking a diagnosis, do not be afraid to advocate for yourself. Some healthcare providers may not be familiar with how autism presents in adults, so it's okay to seek out specialists or to ask for a second opinion. Up next is practicing self-compassion. This journey can bring up a lot of emotions: relief, grief, confusion, and everything in between. Be kind to yourself as you process these feelings. The fifth on our list is something that we don't think about often, but it's to create a sensory-friendly environment. If you have sensory sensitivities, think about how you can make your home or workspace more comfortable. For example, I use noise-canceling headphones and keep soft lighting in my office. 6, something we never think about but so important, is setting boundaries. It's okay to say no to things that drain your energy or overwhelm you. Setting boundaries is an act of self-care, and it's not selfish. Finally up is celebrate your strength. Autism comes with unique strengths, whether it's attention to detail, creativity, or deep focus. Take time to recognize and celebrate these qualities in yourself. Now, these are just a few ideas to get you started. Remember, this is your journey, and it's okay to take it one step at a time. One of the main reasons I'm so passionate about autism advocacy is because of how my own diagnosis shaped my perspective. I want others to know that it's okay to be different, that it's okay to embrace neurodivergence. The autism community often feels misunderstood, and I'm here to change that narrative. Having an autism diagnosis later in life doesn't mean we've lost time or that our experiences aren't valid. It means we can rewrite the narrative around autism, both for ourselves and for future generations. I've learned to advocate for my own needs, whether it's in my personal relationships, my work, or within the autism community. And I do believe that advocacy starts with us. As autistic individuals, we have the power to change how the world views us, not as a set of deficits, but as individuals with unique strengths and talents. For example, many autistic adults have incredible attention to detail. the deep focus, and unique ways of problem solving. These are strengths that should be celebrated, not overlooked. One way that I've been able to advocate is by sharing my story openly. Whether it's through my blog, this podcast, social media, or speaking engagements, I found that being vulnerable and honest about my experiences helps others feel less alone. And that's what advocacy is all about. Creating connection and understanding. I've learned that embracing neurodiversity is more than just accepting our differences. It's about celebrating them. For me, that meant finding tools and strategies that work for me, whether it's creating a structured environment, setting clear boundaries, or using communication methods that are comfortable for me. Neurodiversity isn't just about autism. It's about creating spaces where everyone can thrive no matter how they think, feel, or experience the world. And that's something I am passionate about building through my platform. Advocacy isn't just about one diagnosis though. It's about creating spaces where everyone can thrive no matter how they think, feel, or experience the world. And that's something I'm passionate about building through my platform. One practical tip I found helpful is to create sensory-friendly environments no matter where you're at, whether that be a school, office building, something like that. For example, like we talked about earlier, noise-canceling headphones, using fidgets, or having the ability to take breaks when feeling overwhelmed. These are small adjustments that can make a huge difference in managing sensory sensitivities and reducing stress. Advocacy is just about making things more accessible to everyone. As I continue on this journey, I'm excited to see where it takes me. I'm constantly learning, growing, and discovering new ways to advocate for autism acceptance and for neurodiversity as a whole. And as I share my experiences with all you, I hope it sparks a conversation that leads to a more inclusive, standing world for everyone. I want to thank you all for joining me today and listening to my story. If you're on a similar journey, I'd love to hear from you. What has your experience been like? What questions do you have? Let's keep this conversation going.